So, thank you friends for being here, and we're celebrating some fruit of that mutual accompaniment path, of that walking together. And this fruit is called Mutuo Acompañamiento en la Ruah Divina, sobre el discernimiento y la espiritualidad para tiempos inciertos, which is an exchange of letters between Juan Carlos Lapuente and Carlos Mendoza. And thanks to the dialogue, the collaboration, the complicity of Yoli Jones, it has transformed itself into, let me read it right, mutual accompaniment in the Divine Ruah. And also thanks you to the collaboration and complicity of A los Vientos Editores or Ediciones?
Ediciones.
A los Vientos Ediciones, Juan Manuel Escamilla and Diego Rosales. It is going to become like an object, like a book, and we want to celebrate that by sharing together and learning about interchange. So this is the presentation of this English version of Juan Carlos and Carlos's epistolary exchange.
One of the places that I immediately went to was, given the context of our world at war, the crisis of modernity, our concepts, our institutions not serving us, or in many cases hurting us, where might we find spiritualities that Margarita writes in her foreword, spiritualities plural, to help give us that strong backbone, to help give us a sense of hope and peace and wonder, even in the midst of how we've been talking about, the horrors that we face every day. You talk to us about the vital sap that must be preserved and allowed to flow. You talk about waking up and the call to mutuality and waking up to that true self within us. This takes a strong practice, friends. It takes a strong practice to get there and to be allowed to sink into that. And one of the images that came to mind was of the sixth station of the cross, which is Veronica's veil. So for those of you who don't know about Veronica's veil, it's an extra biblical story that is not contained in any of the Gospels. However, since especially I think the 14th century, it's been celebrated and lifted up in the medieval practice of the Stations of the Cross. And it tells of a story of Veronica, who's a friend of Jesus, who on Jesus's road to the cross, the Via Dolorosa, is in so much pain with Jesus in witnessing the torture and the struggle, getting on the way through the trauma. She witnesses it. And she doesn't have much, but she takes maybe a handkerchief, maybe a shawl, a piece of a veil, and she brings it over to Jesus, risking her life, risking everything. And she holds up the cloth and covers Jesus' face to wipe away the blood and the tears. And in my community, we've had a practice from time to time in the middle of worship, I'm a Lutheran pastor, of holding up our hands to our face and imagining Veronica putting the veil up to us. And what would that be like if you were to do that now? What would that do for Jesus in his hour of need? Might it be that Jesus is allowed in that moment, his friend helping to remind him of the subterranean river of dreams, of his true self, of the strength that he needs to get through this awful, worst moment. as an act of love, Veronica holds the veil up to his face, leaving an imprint of Jesus' face. But interestingly enough, that word Veronica, right? Vera meaning truth, icon meaning an image of truth. Now, some religious people get into it and they say, well, the image of truth is the image of Jesus' face. That's what it is. We got Jesus' face here now. That's the whole point of the name and what's going on here. We've got this relic, this holy relic we can hold on to and worship and all those things. But I believe that the image of truth is Veronica embodying divinity and embodying true friendship. She is the image of truth for all of us and modeling that for us.
A really beautiful experience for me this summer to just have that time with these words and like with the communities that these words are coming out of, and they are deeply part of this physical thing. So last night, before we went out and like did a lot of this, we were sitting and chatting, and Tyler shared that story of the image of Veronica like stepping forward, breaking the fourth wall, breaking the script, breaking with what was expected, and being a divine disruptor, like a divine anarchist, at great risk to self, as representatives of empire are murdering her friend in front of her. And I couldn't help but think of the colectivos of mujeres who are searching for their children, and they are breaking scripts. They are breaking with the expectation that they will just sit home and be quiet and withstand this robbing of their flesh, of their children. We know that this trauma remains. We know that the mothers are still searching for their children. There are more mothers searching now than there were, before. And we know that war continues and that these horrors continue. So how do we practice knowing that? And these words from Carlos and Juan Carlos really speak to how do we engage with that in an embodied way, and how do we hold one another in an embodied way as we continue this work.
So I know that I need spirituality that comes from life, and I can't experience life without my body. I mean, the only way I have to engage life, all life, big L life, right, is through my body. And as we do, I think we recognize that there's a lot going on in there, right? There's a lot of wisdom there. You have feelings. They suck sometimes, especially the big ones. We are in our physicality, in our pain, in our joy, in our intuitions. And I think, Juan Carlos, this connects with what you talk about the myth of self, or I might name as like the individual. Because when we start to become present, and I think that might just be the core practice. The core practice of spirituality and discernment. It's the thing that starts and ends and starts and ends and starts and ends in that spiral. That presence of self, of one another, and the life around us. When we start to become present, it brings us to that depth of self that you're talking about. Over the surface of self, like we're big, and it. And I think when we can reach in there, and And that cracks, and I'll talk about this later, I think it's often cracked from without, though. That when we crack in there, we discover that we are not self, but I am communal. Like at my very being. My body is made of so many organisms and systems. I'm like a host for so much. My guts are not okay here, so I'm like feeling that. We have DNA and the dreams and violence of our ancestors like living within us. We have the resilient memories that we can uncover and unveil. We have former selves. I'm in therapy, and my therapist is big into internal family systems. I don't know if you know about that, but like that you are a family system in yourself, and you have former selves there, but your soul which is whole, can attend to all and accompany into wholeness that all of those former selves. And we are life, so the divine, the creator, is present within us, Ruah, that animates us and moves us and breathes us.
On page 41, Juan Carlos I write this, but I could have written it. What will become of me? What will happen to me? As I talked with one person yesterday, am I crazy? These are the questions that, when we're forgetting or being dismembered, being fractured, isolated from one another, these are the questions that I can't get beyond. Because when you're a witness to the pain, and take the risk of disruption to be a witness in that moment, you're recognizing the sacred in a human being. And the questions, what will become of me, what will happen to me, am I crazy, they desacralize. We forget our humanity, we forget our divinity, we forget that we're made of the stars and the dust, and that we're connected, yes, to our ancestors and to each other and all of our other than human kin, and the continuous creation that you write about, Carlos. But when we see and honor the sacred in one another, amidst moments of, well, if you just would have not spoken out as hard, if you just would have gone along with the flow, maybe it would have been more strategic, and we could have figured out a plan. Jesus could have developed an NGO within the Roman Empire. We could have funded, figured out a system. I don't know what it means when you make yourself laugh.
It means you're a dad.
It means I'm a dad, that's it. There's a mutual unveiling, a sacred unveiling that can happen. When we honor the humanity, when we honor the sacred, when we call ourselves back to an ecosystem of relationship and away from the ecosystem of some of these questions. I'm grateful to friend Ray Pickett for noticing the interplay of an ecosystem and an ecosystem. And I hear that echo in some of the texts of the self and the individual versus the collective. And an invitation into an ecosystem way of life, away from an ecosystem that can hide itself as being strategic or helping. Elias shared earlier. To hell with good intentions, Ivan Illich said. I want to mention one more piece maybe. I hear throughout your letters this practice of divine surprise. When Veronica has this encounter with Jesus, it's a surprise. When Chell leads us in an exercise to get a little silly, or when we say, you know what, we're gonna say shit, and we're going to quote Daddy Yankee, and we're going to use the vernacular. It's a surprise that pulls us out of the patterns of progress. And so I wonder for all of us, I wonder for myself, what are those practices of divine surprise that help us nurture the web of relationship, to nurture the ecosystem?
And the piece that spoke to me the most, Carlos, was this, I come away, this is paraphrasing, is spirituality is for the survivors. And I cannot have a real spirituality or spiritualities unless I think of myself as someone who is surviving in the face of horror. And that is not the default way of thinking in my community. And I live in one of the most expensive cities in the United States, with some of the largest wealth disparity dynamics, and even the good people that I pastor with, we do not think of ourselves as survivors. It's a place where people have bumper stickers on their cars that say, "You're in Bend, be nice. Bend sucks, don't move here." Because we cannot deal with any sense of things are hard. We cannot deal with any sense of reality that there is horror. We cannot deal with change. That is the place where I live. But the people that I pastor with are people that, for whom spirituality is a minefield. Something that is to be suspicious of and skeptical of. And it was not until, the dancing that you write about and the dynamics in this walking and the writing that you are remembering in this, that I was able to remember and see my own wounds, right? And to show them to people, for people to see their own wounds. And that was a lot of what the writing was about when I first started, and it still is. I feel like we have been reading and writing about one another's wounds for 7-8 years. And for the people that I'm ministering to, that is a revelation that we might approach spiritualities, the spiritualities that we inherit in the biblical narratives as ancient indigenous stories of survival in the face of horror that requires adaptation and change. And all of a sudden, I see myself there. And all of a sudden, we have something to work with together. And so the power for me is like, what about salvation? Because salvation, that's for the victors. And if it's not for the victors, at least it's for the good people, right? But no, salvation is for the survivors.
How we discern, how we look for wisdom in times of horror. So that question came up out of a conversation we had in Boston, when I was visiting you, because out of love I was concerned about my friend. Topics also, I need his company to talk. So I was surprised that after our conversation in Boston, then he tried to follow the conversation, sending me a letter. So I really appreciate that. First, I want to say that. So the first chapter is the first letter. And yeah, I have a journey on how to discern, right? How to discern, and then through that process, I've been discovering a new type of presence in my life that is difficult to talk about. But through the writing, we explore about the simultaneous presence. Some people can say communion, but I like simultaneous presence as well. there's a simultaneous presence in our hearts, in our bodies. But so through discernment, we start like at the same time we allow ourselves to be moved by the Divine Ruah, wisdom, love, life. At the same time, we start experiencing being moved. Being moved, there's an experience of being moved by joy in the midst of horror. So I explore also in conversation with you, Carlos, I was exploring about how underneath the pain we can ground ourselves in that deep love that is underneath the pain. So I invite you to just, it's a conversation, really, the epistolary exchange, the third letter, the fourth letter, all of this is an open conversation for all of us. And then maybe later, depending, I can share more about what kind of dream also, not dream, but gratitude, and also what I want to share more for out of this. Yeah. How about you, hermano?
What about the condor? Because I like very much that.
The condor.
Because it represents really the spirituality of discernment, and then to be moved and
Yes.
keep moving, right?
Yes.
Say something about this because it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think so. In the Andes, the Peruvian Andes, and also Chelsea, I know the Ecuadorian part of the Andes and all of that. The condor are like so large, big, when they extend their wings, no? And they don't do so much effort constantly to fly. They just catch up the wind. They are attuned to the wind. So there's a lot of wisdom there, and so you need the wind and also the attunement, getting attuned, right? And when that happens, they can fly tremendous speed, and they can fly so far away from the air. And so I connect that if we discern wisdom, we are being attuned to life, so we can experience this energy, this simultaneous presence, this interconnection. I like simultaneous presence.
And 21 years ago, I met Juan Carlos for the first time in Santiago de Chile. And I realized then that Juan Carlos had a very important gift to connect two different worlds, I would say, which is the human rights activism to spirituality. Mm-hmm. He was involved in these kind of processes on human rights, Pablo too, right? Remember, and the contact with the indigenous communities in southern Mexico, here in Oaxaca and there in Chiapas. Talking about injustice, talking about human rights, about truth commissions in Colombia, for instance, in Peru, and so on. So, but at the same time, a lot of sorrow and suffering. Sometimes the people who were working in this field, they were really traumatized in some way. There was a lack of strength, of hope, of life. And that's why you were in some way looking also for spirituality. What kind of strength allows us to support this kind of sorrow and rage, and sometimes. So we started the conversation that appears in some way in this little book 21 years ago, and we have been following this trend, this river in some way, in different moments in our lives, and with you, all of you in STMA, the Spiritual, Theological, Mutual Accompaniment, and some other communities, Unitierra Chiapas too, the colleagues there, the friends there, who were close to the Zapatistas, who are close to the Zapatista project of society, which is deeply rooted in decolonial thinking and critical thinking, but following the wisdom of the Maya cultures. And so my experience is that this is a conversation that needs to move on and to continue to have new partners in some way, new interlocutors, right? Probably you know I like very much films, a filmmaker, Mexican filmmaker, Alfonso Cuarón. Some years ago, his movie Children of Men, he's describing an apocalyptic scene, right, about the end of humanity. Humanity is not anymore fertile in some way. So we are in that kind of moment where humanity seems to be confronted to horror in a more global way. We are right now in some way witnessing a genocide in Gaza, but also in Congo for several decades. Of course, immigration, and Pablo, you could tell much more about that, the human rights crisis all over the world, and how can we still alive and keep moving and being people of hope and love without that spirituality, right? So that's why the category and the experience, not a category, is also an experience to be a survivor. It's absolutely relevant in my understanding, following all these sources like, of course, our dear Gustavo Esteva. Because hope now is a political imagination, a political act of imagination, I would say. And that's why spirituality is deeply related to all of us in some way, because in different ways we are survivors. And spirituality, I think, is also related to this experience of being ourselves in our bodies, wounded but joyful also bodies. We can heal together. So that's just an invitation. This little book is about this. What kind of spirituality raising from the survivors in this global violence that is in some way spreading throughout the world today in different expressions, but what is important, and that's why Unitierra, we saw Unitierra, Oaxaca, Chiapas, are like little examples of the cracks in the system, where there are a small community or a bigger one experiencing conviviality, friendship, mutual accompaniment, then there is hope, right? It's a spring there, and I think that's we are all in some way creating together. So thank you so much for being part of this conversation, and I think we'll be continuing writing letters, right?
I hope so. Yeah.
Thank you so much.